The Farmhouse of Echoes. The farmhouse had stood for over a century on the outskirts of a forgotten town. Weather-beaten and isolated, it sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by overgrown fields that hadn't seen a harvest in decades. Local legend had it that the farmhouse was cursed, but no one could say exactly why. People simply avoided it, and those who did venture too close never stayed long. Sarah and David, a young couple looking for a fresh start, were unaware of the farmhouse's dark history. They had been searching for an affordable home, and when they found the old farmhouse listed at an unbelievably low price, they couldn't believe their luck. The real estate agent was vague about why the price was so low, only saying that the previous owners had left abruptly. Eager to escape the city, Sarah and David ignored the warning signs and bought the property. From the moment they moved in, something felt off. The house was unnervingly quiet, as if the walls were holding their breath. The floorboards creaked at odd intervals, and the temperature always seemed to drop a few degrees whenever they entered certain rooms. But Sarah and David chalked it up to the house's age and tried to settle in. One night, about a week after they moved in, Sarah woke up to the sound of footsteps echoing through the house. She shook David awake, but when they listened, the house was silent again. David dismissed it as the house settling, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The next morning, while exploring the property, Sarah found an old, rusty key buried under a loose floorboard in the living room. The key was heavy and cold to the touch, and it seemed to vibrate slightly in her hand. She showed it to David, but he laughed it off, suggesting it was probably just for an old closet or a door that no longer existed. That night, the footsteps returned, louder and more deliberate. This time, they both heard it. David grabbed a flashlight and they cautiously searched the house, but they found nothing. Yet, the sound continued, moving from room to room, as if someone was walking just ahead of them, always out of sight. Frustrated and scared, David suggested they sleep in the living room together, thinking it might just be nerves from the move. But the moment they settled in, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath came out in visible puffs, and then the whispering began, soft at first, barely audible, but growing louder and more insistent. The whispers seemed to be coming from the walls, filling the room with a low, murmuring chant that neither of them could understand. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The darkness was absolute, and the whispers grew into a cacophony, echoing around them until it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. Desperate, Sarah grabbed the old key from the coffee table where she had left it earlier. As soon as she touched it, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening, and they could feel an oppressive weight lift from the room. The next day, they decided to explore the basement, the only part of the house they hadn't dared to enter. The stairs were steep and narrow, leading down into a space that smelled of damp earth and decay. At the far end of the basement, they found a large, iron door, locked tight, with a keyhole that matched the old key perfectly. With trembling hands, Sarah inserted the key and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dark room. The air inside was stifling, filled with the scent of rot. In the center of the room was a wooden box, its surface covered in strange, carved symbols. David hesitated, but Sarah, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear, opened the box. Inside were old, yellowed papers, covered in more of the strange symbols, along with what looked like a crude, hand-drawn map of the farmhouse and the surrounding fields. As they studied the map, they noticed something chilling. Beneath the house, marked clearly on the map, was a large area labeled the Pit. There was no entrance to it on the map, just a warning written in jagged letters, asterisk, do not disturb the soil. Asterisk. Suddenly, the ground beneath them rumbled, and the house groaned as if it were alive. The whispers returned, now furious, filling the basement with a roar of angry voices. The door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The air grew thick, and the walls began to tremble, dust and debris falling around them. In a panic, they tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers were now shouting, an incomprehensible torrent of voices that seemed to claw at their minds. The box in Sarah's hands grew unbearably hot, and the symbols on the papers inside began to glow with an eerie, red light. Just when it seemed like the walls would collapse in on them, Sarah dropped the box, and the ground beneath them gave way. They fell, tumbling into a deep, dark pit that had opened up in the basement floor. The falls seemed endless, the voices surrounding them in a deafening chorus. When they finally hit the bottom, the air was cold, and they were in complete darkness. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a low, rumbling noise. As their eyes adjusted to the dark, they realized they were not alone. Around them were the remains of those who had lived in the farmhouse before them, skeletons, their bones twisted in unnatural shapes, as if they had been trying to escape something horrific. And then, from the darkness, they saw it, a figure, tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It reached out toward them, its voice now clear and singular among the echoes of the damned. "You have disturbed the soil. Now, you belong to it." The story ends with Sarah and David being swallowed by the earth, joining the countless others who had fallen victim to the farmhouse's curse, their voices adding to the whispers that would haunt the next unwitting visitors.